So, when I was 18, I joined the horse cavalry, re-enlisted 3 years later, and started in the Army fighting in Europe. I started in that February '43.
While I was in high school, we knew when we were in high school that somehow or another we were going to wind up in the service. So I wanted to choose where I wanted to go. And I always was interested in flying. So when they offered, the Army Air Corps came to our school and they offered us cadet training. If we passed all the physical and the mental and everything, we would be sworn in but not taken into active duty until we graduated. That was the guarantee they gave us. So that's what I chose.
Yeah, I enlisted when I was a senior in high school.
Well, my father said I was an only child, and that's all he had to send. So I had gone to school in New York for a year, and then I worked for a year. And then when the war came along, it seemed like an opportunity to me to go places and do things and help out.
And we moved out in January of '44 and went to England.
Hitler would not allow Rommel, who was in charge of the defense of he wouldn't allow him to have panzers. He kept the panzers for defense of Germany, the way I understand it. A lot of stuff don't make news like that. When I got ashore, everything was horses, believe it or not. Horse-drawn ambulances, horse-drawn artillery, horse-drawn, you name it, whatever the Germans moved, was all hitched up for horses.
Over in the 8th Air Force in England, flying over Germany, bombing missions over Germany.
The Americans had taken a knoll at the foot of a mountain, and the Japs were all around the bottom. And when the first trip in, I got out of the helicopter and they were getting ready to load one of the wounded into a stretcher, and some firefight started. And the captain in charge says, "Come with me," and he took me over to a foxhole. The only thing I had with me was a revolver. He put me in, he says, "Just keep your head down," which wasn't hard to do.
You had to be 20, so when I was 19, one of the teachers in Peekskill, been in my high school, was the enlistment officer, and I tried to get him to get me in early. That's how anxious I was to get going. But he said no, so on my 20th birthday, I got on a subway. Never been to Brooklyn in my life, but that's where I enlisted.
They gave me this big horse and with a rope through its mouth, no bits, no bridles, and then 2 more tied with ropes around their necks. And when one of these trucks backfired on the road, naturally the fight by now was down to about 30 miles from us, and I guess the horse was in the shelling and something, and it bolted. And it ran down the hedgerow and jumped over a fence, and as I looked down I saw the sign Minen, M-I-N-E-N, that's German for minefield. So I bailed off.
I got married when the war was over in Europe, and I came back and I had a 30-day leave and I had to go back to active duty afterwards to train for Pacific because the war wasn't over in Japan yet. So during that 30-day active time when I was home, my wife had prepared everything. I don't know what it is to prepare a wedding. She prepared everything. I just walked in and got married.
No, the Navy didn't allow women to go out of the country until into the 3rd year that I was in the service, and they wanted help at Pearl Harbor, and I was either the first or second in line to retire to get into that. So I did go to Pearl Harbor, but that was 10 days after they dropped the bomb in Japan.
When I first got into the city of Manila, the Japanese had already been defeated more or less from that area. But I stood on a bridge over, I can't recall the name of the river, and I stood there for an hour watching dead bodies, corpses. Most of them, thank God, Japanese, not American, just drifting down into Manila Bay.
We moved up after Normandy, and we fought all the way to the Battle of the Bulge. And I was taken prisoner at the Battle of the Bulge.
Well, I graduated from Cornell in June of 1950. I went into the service for 3.5 months then at the artillery school in Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
I had signed up for the airborne, and I went through that training, and on the day we were supposed to jump, 125 men were told that we had to take our second week over again, and some of the men didn't like the idea because of our name where it was. We happened to be in the 4th platoon, and they decided, the commanding officer decided the 4th platoon was going to take the second week over again because they could only jump 300 men at a time. So we were punished because of our last name. And some of the men, one of them was a colonel, and there were a lot of officers involved. And they disliked that. They thought that they should have flipped to see what platoon was going to be pulled back. So they quit, and I quit along with them. So we all got shipped to Korea.
Went into the military in 1951. Decided that I was going to miss out on Korea. I didn't want to miss that. So I joined the Marine Corps, enlisted as a private, and went down to the rifle range at Paris Island and also boot camp.
The first day, we were told the Air Force was going to circle around and strafe the Chinese hill next to ours, and that there would be a white phosphorus shell would indicate to the Air Force that that's the place. Well, somehow the Air Force got screwed up, and the first thing that happened to me on the first afternoon was we got strafed by the American Air Force. I rolled in, thank God, I was able to roll into a tunnel, in kind of a trench really, and the bullets missed me, obviously.
Many times the artillery will shoot white phosphorus shells. This is hot stuff. It'll burn metal. So when particles of it fall on the ground, it'll start a little bit of a grass fire or a forest fire or whatever. So arriving at night and some of the men pointing up at the main line of resistance, there was fire. Everything was burning. And I'm thinking, this is terrible. But it turned out it was just grass fires, and because of the phosphorus falling and setting fires.
And I went down to the rifle range at Paris Island and also boot camp. And while on the rifle range, I had the good fortune to set a new record for the Marine Corps with a rifle. So they said, Austin, you're staying here on the range. You're not going to Korea, which is where I really wanted to go.
I was sent up on with the infantry on the hill as a forward observer. Actually, out in front of it was rather exciting after having been in America. The next morning, I found myself on a very sharp hill out in front of the main lines with a company of American soldiers. from the 40th Division.
I remember I was scared to death the first time we were shelled. And when you hear artillery shell whistling over your head, it's a very eerie sound. And I was a little afraid, but one gray-haired fellow said, when you can hear it, you don't have to worry about it. The one that's got your number on it doesn't make a sound.
My duty was to look for targets around the what used to be the town of Kumsong. That's the area that we covered. And if you saw anybody moving or any suspected somebody was in the remains of houses or something like that, you called in the coordinates and you reported them to the battery what you had seen. And usually they would fire on them. Quite exciting at times.
We always had one man on the gun 24 hours a day. And one man was always designated to set the sights, and the chief of section's job was to make sure the proper setting was on the sight and that he placed a quadrant on the flat part of the gun and made sure the bubbles were level, because you could actually shoot a short round and shoot your own men.
And I'll tell you something. I don't mind telling you that I was scared. It was the worst. It was the most scary thing I did in Korea was to be a forward observer, because at night the Chinese would try to infiltrate. And one good thing was we lived on sea rations, which came in cans. And when you were through eating, you threw your can down like this, threw as far as you could. And most of it ended up at the bottom of this very sharp hill. And as a result, when the Chinese tried to come in at night, they couldn't avoid hitting some of those cans down there. And then lights would come on and machine guns would sound, and it was quite something.
I went to Korea. I went in the service weighing 168. I came home weighing 129.
The mess sergeant came to me one day and said, "We're out of sugar." I said, "You're out of sugar? How in the hell could that be?" He said, "Come on down to breakfast tomorrow." So the next day I went down to breakfast, and these Koreans, 3 dozen Koreans, came through the chow line, and they got coffee the first thing. And I am not lying, they was filled the coffee to the brim with sugar. They had never had sugar before.
Got in on the Cuban crisis in 1962, flew down there. There was a U-2 that got shot down over northern Cuba. And I was asked to go photograph that site, the SAM site that shot it down, which I did. And I recommended to the colonel, who was a ground pounder and didn't know anything about aircraft or aerial photography, I recommended to him that I make a low-level hop over the site, and there would be no chance of them shooting me down as they did the U-2. But he said no, they wanted high-altitude pinpoints from 35,000 feet. But he said, "That's okay." He said, "Don't worry." He said, "I'll have 2 fighter planes 15 miles offshore as cover for you." And I thanked him and said, "Well, they can mark the splash then." He thought that was not funny. But at any rate, took the photos and nothing happened.
I wanted to go to Vietnam because all my friends were there. And I was stationed in Fort Rucker, Alabama, which is probably worse than Vietnam. And I volunteered a number of times and was turned down, and finally took a letter to my congressman. But, after the letter went in, I went to Vietnam 30 days later.
I was in during the Vietnam, but I ended up going to Germany, which I guess was backyard support. There was a lot of military still over there in Germany.
And I was a munitions specialist. And my first tour of duty was in Kunsan, Korea. And they were shipping, after you got done in Korea, everybody was headed for Vietnam with that particular career field. So instead of rotating back to the States and then getting shipped back over, I just went from Korea to Vietnam.
I didn't want to go to college, so I picked the Marines and joined the Marines the day after I graduated.
Actually, I joined the service because at that point, back in the 60s, they were still doing drafting notices. And Air Force is in my family's history, so I decided to join the Air Force.
I served 2 full tours in Vietnam. I was a medical evacuation pilot. Our call sign was dust off.
They were pretty good about getting the American guys out that got hurt. It was quick. They'd come in and a dust off, and those pilots were tremendous and medevac you out.
So when you got the call, you had the maps, you got the coordinates. That was always part of the call. We have 3 wounded, 1 very serious at 899-76301. So you look on the map and take the longitude and the latitude and pinpoint and take off, head toward it, and then you'd stay up at like 2,500 feet above the sea. And if they were under enemy attack, you usually had to wait to get 2 gunships to follow you.
I spent, out of the 15 months, I spent 9 months living on a mountaintop with 2 of the men, keeping our radio relay station going.
Actually, in Vietnam, I was flying a desk, and that wasn't as much fun.
I flew 1,400 missions in the 2 years. I was a command pilot most of the time. I was blessed by being commanding officer in 3 different combat units.
Bridges, blowing bridges, anything but C4, dynamite.
The Navy brought the munitions into the port. The Army transported them to the bomb dump. We assembled them and run them down to the flight line.
And we kept the radio relay station going. We had a truck, radio hut on a truck, sitting up on top of a mountain. And we lived in tents, did our own cooking, and kept the generators running to keep the radios working.
Almost 3 years I was in Mountain Home Air Force Base, Idaho, and that was what they call a Tactical Air Command, TAC, and I was on a 24-hour notice. Within 24 hours I had to either be at or en route to anywhere in the world.
I received shrapnel from a rocket, actually 2 times.
We're all young boys, 18 and 19. We're on a convoy, and we started getting shot at, and you could hear the bullets going over your head. We jumped off the trucks. My rifle went one way, my helmet the other, and you just laid on the ground. You didn't even know what to do.
It wasn't a happy time, believe me. We came home, and I was proud of what I did.
But you didn't fit. We didn't fit back in with...
It wasn't like World War II, where you came home where you won the war. We didn't win it. There's no way. And it wasn't like Korea. It was just, it was a really sad situation. 58,000 guys got killed. And for what?
The great majority of men and women in Vietnam did an outstanding job. History has treated them horribly.
I think just because of the type of action it was, where we didn't come home heroes. We didn't come home especially proud of the fact that we were there, and that it wasn't because of the way we felt. but it was the perception we were getting from the public.
Well,
and that made it different, so that we really only had each other that could understand that.
That was a troubled
Yep.
time. You
Yep.
have to understand that. I mean, when we left home in 1965, everybody was wearing a crew cut. When I came home in 1968, everybody had long hair.
The Air Force initially, because one, I was certain I was going to be drafted, and I went in to control where I would be going to try and get the best educational opportunities that I could. I was fairly successful in the military. I liked it. I liked the structure that it provided and some other things that were part of it. And we liked traveling around, which they provided for me and my family.
I'm a Master Sergeant, a First Sergeant for the 139th Aeromedical Evacuation Squadron at Stratton Air National Guard Base down in Scotia. U.S. Army, retired 1981 as a Lieutenant Colonel. I was in the Armor Corps in cavalry through those 20 years.
I was in the United States Army for 23 years, from about 1985 to 2006.
My branch was the United States Army. My specialty was crane operating and truck driving.
My father had been in the Air Force, and he thought it was a good thing that I go in. But my mother, of course, was not happy. And I was married when I went in, and I enlisted without telling my wife. And at first she wasn't real thrilled, but in the end it turned out to be a very good thing.
I think my mom was very hesitant. My father, like I, served, and I think my mom was very hesitant, wanted me to go to college. Was awarded an ROTC Army scholarship out of high school. So I did my ROTC studies at Clarkson University, graduated in May of '81, and a month later I was off to my officer basic training.
Well, I went to school at Clarkson University, and they offered to pay for my second, third, and fourth year of school, so I took that, and then I just continued to stay in after my 4-year commitment was up.
My brother and I actually joined together, but he got out before I even went active. My father served.
We would work in war command posts and bunkers and keep the communications warm in case we would go to conflict.
When I first came into the military, I was what was called a printer systems operator. Interesting because it's basically a euphemism for what I really did. What I really did was I was a Russian cryptologist. I was a code breaker. Actually, my commission was a second lieutenant, and when I was initially commissioned out of Clarkson, it was in the Signal Corps, which is communications.
I got commissioned from Fort Belvoir as an engineer officer, and I went to, the first assignment was a place called Aschaffenburg, Germany. I spent a couple of years there, and then went to Stuttgart, and then all over the place in Germany. Overall, it was 14 years in the European theater.
Well, as a platoon leader, you had a platoon of 3 tanks and 4 armored personnel carriers. And you were part of a company. There were 3 platoons in a company. And you were the first to meet that force that came across the border, if that time ever occurred.
Of the rivalries between U.S. Air Force, Army, and Navy, I just think of U.S. Army, and Navy, and Air Force, and then multiply that times 16 or 17 other nations, and the national rivalries and the military rivalries that were there. And so NATO was called never asked the officers and not able to organize because just things took forever to make anything happen. It's amazing what we were able to accomplish.
But I think I was fortunate enough to go to Bosnia and then back to Kosovo during those operations. Fortunate, I was there, and those were some interesting situations.
I'm responsible for the health, morale, welfare, and basically readiness of my airmen.
Well, what I would do is I would drive tractor trailer. We would haul anywhere between front end loaders to cement barriers for the voting booths for the Iraqis when they were going to be voting for the first time. We gave them security.
I have not served regretfully in a theater of operation, as it were. I have served during wartime. I went down to Andrews Air Force Base in support of Operation Enduring Freedom, which is the current operation. But I have not served in theater, and that's...
The first time when I was in the Persian Gulf War, it felt like a picnic. It really did. Even though it was a war, it felt like a picnic because all we did was we issued out ammunition, and that was our main mission on there. But in Iraq was a little bit more stress because you had to go through the villages. And I can remember one night we were going through a village, and it looked just like a movie scene where you're going through this deserted streets, papers flying around, and then you're looking up to see what's up above you, because that was one of the areas that got hit hard, but we didn't get hit. We were safe.
That also was a time when President Clinton had decided to downsize our military. We had people being rolled out, being offered chances to retire early, which had never happened before. I chose to stay on active duty, serve through the Bush administration, right up to, and including, my time included the Gulf War, and Griffiths Air Force Base was very much involved in that, but we weren't in the combat theater.
They called me back in 2005 to go to Iraq, and we had a couple incidences there where mortars hit and gunfire.
There's always danger, even in training for, I think, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guard folks. But I think, when you're in a hostile environment, that's probably what most people think of. But they have to remember that military people face danger all the time, not just in a hostile environment.
In those days, there was no communication via computers. It was all by letter, snail mail. It took a long time to get a letter from home.
Thinking about mail, our mail was censored. We couldn't write and tell anybody. We could tell them where we were, but we couldn't tell them what we were doing.
Those days, tapes were the in thing. You had a real tape recorder, and you taped conversations. She wrote basically every day. I wrote once a week, most of the time.
We couldn't wait for mail call.
What she would do was she would write me a letter in circles backwards, and my roommate would come walking in, and I'd be standing in front of a mirror taking a letter like this, reading it, and he'd look at me and say, "Oh, you got a letter from your girlfriend, huh?"
Call home almost every night. I mean, I'd get on the computer, do some emails to certain people, and I'd call my mother every night, my daughter every other night at the babysitter's house, and I'd talk to her. She wouldn't understand who she's talking to, but she'd say Daddy, then she'd start calling me Bob because everybody else was calling me Bob.
I think that you're ready to help out, you're ready to go, you work like a unit. It doesn't matter if I'm working with one guy or 10 guys, you get it in there and get after work and get it done.
All the veterans like me that have served during the period of what we call the Cold War, there have been always opportunities for Cold Wars to become hot. The perseverance of our nation and the veterans that served to be on vigil and to be alert for that length of time is incredible. And I don't want them to be forgotten. So thank you for letting me speak for them.
The person next to you and the person behind you is more important than you are. And you need to make sure that you understand that.
Cherish the days I was in uniform. I met and made friendships that I continue today.
I think it just makes you look at things different. I don't know. It's a great. You see the world if you join the right branch. Where some people would get out of school, stay in the same town, never see anything in the world.
Years I was in the Army, it was never about me, and it never should be. It's about the people you serve with and what they get accomplished.
It made a man out of me. I was living home with my mother and father, and my mother babied me.
Well, I have to this day a tremendous respect for the Army. It goofs up, but it works. I mean, there might be some phases of it that are slow or incompetent, but in general, the Army performs, and that's very important.
You go in the military, you're not going to go for a picnic. You're going to go to actually train and do your job.
We lived in the best of times in this whole country. The times when everything mattered. And it's very disappointing and very sad to see the direction in which we're going now.
I was a clown in high school. I was not a very good student. Friends laugh when they find out I'm a teacher now. But Vietnam kind of did that. It made me more focused, more serious. So in that respect, it was good for me, I guess, if anything good came out of Vietnam.
It's made a difference in my life. It's given me a new picture of life and how dear life really is. Life is not something that we can count on day by day to always have it here.
I'm probably more patriotic than I think being in the service makes you patriotic in a way.
My pride in my service to the United States is all based on the wonderful men and women that I was associated with, in command of, and worked for. There's no way to explain to anybody what it's like to have absolute confidence in total strangers whose only commonality with you is they're from the United States.